in the next few minutes, I'm going to go over chapter 9 slides on community organizing, community building. I accidentally did not hit record on our Google Meet session, so I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker because there were so many of you on the Google Meet. And then for those that weren't, that are just watching the recording for the first time and didn't get a chance to attend, please let me know if you have any questions or want to talk about anything in a little bit more detail. But I just want to go over and highlight some of the main things, not to go through the whole thing, I guess, again. So switching over to the slides, looking at community organizing and community building. So this is a population-based approach, and working with communities, groups of people, and populations. So over the course of the semester, we've spent a lot of time on individuals, and now we're looking at the community level, which is defined as a group of people who have common characteristics, and which can be along any of these here on this slide. But really, communities have a sense of identity and belonging. They share values and norms, common symbols and systems, language, and particularly shared needs and commitment to meeting them. And with that shared needs and commitment to meeting them, that is where also community organizing will come into play as well. And we can help with working with those communities. So health promotion specialists, public health professionals really need skills in community organizing and community building, especially now as more and more population-based approaches are utilized versus the individual-based approaches. So communities can be defined by location, race, ethnicity, occupation, health problems, and health outcomes. So breast cancer, for example, there can be online communities, cyber communities, as we are seeing pop up now, different support kind of groups with that. By definition, community organizing is a population-based approach. It encompasses these components of being community-based, so really at the core of in the community that is being served, that it is being empowered. So community empowerment, participation, and community partnerships. So all of these are important to community organizing. Definition here is the process through which communities are helped to identify common problems or goals, mobilize resources, and develop and implement strategies for reaching their goals they have collectively set. So this is where community organizers can come into play as well and really help these community members identify their problems or goals and see some of the issues from a bigger picture, for example, help mobilize the resources, for example, first identifying the resources they have, again, from more of an outside perspective, and then help in developing and implementing those strategies. So assumptions here, similar to health promotion, we have them for community organizing, and we assume that communities can develop and they have the capacity to deal with their own problems. They want to change, they can change, and they need to and should participate in making those changes. So also can assume that self-imposed and self-developed change is more lasting. So helping facilitate them to come up with the ideas and the strategies is going to be way more effective. Taking a holistic approach over fragmented approach, making sure that there's cooperative participation, and that communities really need help with problems just like individuals do. We are more disconnected in this society from those around us in the past, not necessarily through social media and virtually and our friends and our family, but the people that may be living right next to us, we have no idea anything about them, for example. So that's where community organizers come into play. So these processes are key: locality development, social planning, and social action. So locality development is process-oriented, really looking at the process of building that sense of community and seeking community change through participation. So involving people throughout the whole process from planning, implementing, to evaluating. And then social planning and strategic planning is around a task or an issue and focused on problem solving, versus social action, which involves both task and process-oriented and achieves to change to address imbalances in power. So I went over this a little bit more in the Google Meet session, but I'm going to encourage you to also look in your textbook on this. But Saul Alinsky was a very influential community organizer, and his model has been used in community organizing across the country, and is really built on participatory democracy, advocacy, and empowerment. Power in numbers is really important. So the more people that you get involved, especially at this grassroots level, then you will be able to actually have action come out of it. And then, community organizing, you can look at needs-based versus strengths-based. And I'm going to talk about community building and strengths-based here a little bit more. So community building, again, is versus community organizing is strength-based, looking at assets, what people have, what organizations are in the community, and it stresses identification, nurturing, and celebration of these community strengths and assets. So major differences are the type of assessment that's used to determine where to focus effort. So in your textbook are some really good maps of a community and how an assessment might look differently. So actually, I'm going to come up to this slide here shortly, but this is a mapping of strengths or assets and looking at building blocks versus looking at needs. So in the book, I think page 250 to 251, yes, show those different maps and how you might map the problems in a community, homelessness, or where there's high rates of crime, where the food deserts are, versus strengths-based approach. You're going to look at the actual food banks in the neighborhood and maybe neighborhood watch areas, for example. So focusing on those assets rather than the needs is what we're looking at in the community building process. Building blocks are what we look at for mapping a community and for community building and mapping capacity. So primary are those that are located within the community. They're highly controlled by those that live there. It can be individual or organizational assets. Secondary, located also in the neighborhood, but they're largely controlled by outside people. So those are the hospitals, the parks, the higher education institutions. And then finally, the third is the potential building blocks, least accessible and often are originating outside of the neighborhood and controlled by people outside. So this is the map for a neighborhood assets map. And you can see the primary building blocks here in the middle with that are again largely controlled by those within the neighborhood or community. These darker gray are going to be those secondary building blocks, often controlled by outsiders, but within the community itself. And then you've got the potential building blocks around the edge. So media is a good example of the potential and the public information that can influence people, expenditures as well. So the whole process of community organizing and building, you first need to recognize the issue that can come from within and someone coming to you as a professional or facilitator or health specialist to help the community, or maybe it comes from the outside and the issues, really high crime or the food desert. We know it's a food desert, but you want to figure out what is going to work best with that community. So you have to gain entry into that community. So gatekeeper, key term and person that you need to be able to connect with so you can get entry into that community. So when I was in Brazil, I couldn't get into a favela to do my health promotion outreach without first talking with a gatekeeper, meeting with them, and setting a time so that I could come back and actually do the work that I wanted to do. So you really need to build trust with that person. They're going to be very helpful in the whole process with you. They can end up being the leader that you empower to really take on the initiative and work after you leave, because community organizers are not there forever. Community builders are not there forever. They're there to help facilitate some change and empower people to really work through it. So then you need to organize the people. Lots of different aspects of community organizers and characteristics that are important. So included in those are being familiar with the customs and traditions of the community members, knowing any language or subgroup, having leadership skills and development, having skills in empowerment. We need to be able to empower the community members. Also, skills in program planning and development, evaluation, participatory approaches so that you can get everybody involved, and also an awareness of oneself and personal strengths and limitations is important. So those are characteristics of community organizers. Who do you organize? All different types here. You can read more about them in the chapter, but they will range from people that are the leader themselves, so maybe even that gatekeeper or the director of the organization, they come from that group, to people that are doing all the work, that we're going to be in those task forces, those planning committees. So like the doers in your planning committee, you have other people that'll come in and regularly, those occasional participants, and others that just are going to support with money or other resources. Making sure you are including everybody and a very diverse, being aware and flexible, but including participants from all different backgrounds. So the Healthy Communities model that we looked at the beginning of the semester was really successful. It was built on diversity and in making sure to be inclusive to all different ages, cultures, races, education levels, and et cetera. So the organizer also needs to be culturally competent and humble in their work with the community as well. So the more you understand, the better. And some great tips here for increasing and understanding diversity. They're also in your textbook on page 247. But really important to get to know the community you're going to work with and know what they're believing and feeling about different things. Knowing if there's different subgroups within there and getting involved with them, learning about issues that are emerging for them as well. So an example I mentioned in the other presentation I'll mention here is in COVID-19 right now, you know, the issue of access to testing is, you know, is it really accessible to low income populations and African American populations as it is to affluent white populations. So, you know, if you're working with a community and they're, you know, knowing this, then that may be where you could advocate for some change for them. You're going to need to also work with volunteers when you're working in community organizing building. You're working with a lot of people, different subgroups, so you can't do it alone. So there's some really good tips on working with volunteers. Check out page 248 in your text. But keep in mind that volunteers want to be appreciated. You want to get to know them, know their special abilities, and use those. They want to be busy and know that what they're doing is worthwhile. And so provide clear communication. If needed, develop them through training. But volunteers can be really hard, especially if your organization really relies on volunteers, then you want to make sure and spend some time in building them up and providing good experiences for them. There's also coalitions that may form, and more coalitions exist today than many years ago, but coalitions are groups of different organizations coming together around a same topic. So it's a formal long-term alliance of individuals representing groups who agree to work together. So I encourage you to take a look at the website and the video here on Live Healthy Lynchburg, and it involves many organizations, and these are little dated resources, so even more today than there were during the time of this video, but revolved around eating healthy, playing healthy, working. So lots of employers, learning in schools and churches and praying, and so you've got, this is a coalition of a lot of different sectors coming together, but other ones, you know, there's the opioid coalition that exists in the area that came around when the epidemic, when we really were getting those high numbers. A coalition was formed of a lot of different organizations working to help people with addiction, and included police officers, it included people in schools and addiction centers. I mean, it was, I was a part of that. So but it ended up going into another. They got a grant and are now doing a separate initiative, but that coalition really brought a lot of people together for that. Going back to the process a little bit, so after you've got the community organized, you got to get and start really assessing it. And so going back to that mapping and mapping the capacity of the community, looking at the different primary, secondary, and potential building blocks. So once you have the community map, you can determine the priorities and set goals. Then once you come up with some solutions, this could be some great strategic planning type activities done with the community that are very participatory. You can then select the intervention strategies that are appropriate. Again, have people involved in that process. Then implement the plan and of course evaluate it. So this is similar to some of the steps from your generalized model from the beginning of the semester. What's different is that you add on is maintaining those outcomes. So you evaluated it, but you need to maintain it over time. So the evaluation is extended. And then there's this concept of looping back, which could go back to even going back to assessing the community steps. So knowing that communities are fluid, they're changing, there's people moving in and out, problems are changing, health changes, so that looping back and making sure that you're always kind of looking through this process as a cycle. And the last slide here is just to show you a model called the PATCH model, or the Planned Approach to Community Health, and just a way of approaching community organizing and building. And that is, and this process involves and enables members of a community to plan, implement, and evaluate health promotion and disease prevention programs. And this is a model from CDC and starts with mobilizing the community. It's a little bit kind of like Map It too. Remember Map It from Healthy People 2020 was also started with mobilizing. And then you go to collecting and organizing, to choosing those priorities or where you're going to set those goals and objectives, develop that plan, and evaluate that plan. So went through these pretty fast, but again, there was a lot of you on the Google Meet. And if you weren't, or if you're reviewing this, and hopefully I just refreshed a spot, and then get in touch if you have more questions. But I will also be pulling out some key slides here and do a similar review session before the last exam as well. So again, have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.